I'd like to welcome everyone to the Social Justice Forum, which is being hosted by Corpus Christi Church's Social Justice and Building Action Team committees. The topic of tonight's forum is stable housing, the foundation of community. And I have a technical question for Liz, who's running this for us. I see people are still popping up. Can I assume that everyone is on now, even though my screen changes every once in a while?
Yeah, so everybody is on. We do have a couple of people that are jumping on a couple of minutes late. I'll continue to admit them, but you can get going, Craig.
Great. All right, great. So again, welcome to everybody. Where we live is connected to every aspect of our lives. I'm going to quote from the report of the Governor's Task Force on Housing from 2018, because I think it does a nice job of framing the importance of this issue. Success in life starts at home for all ages and all people. When we have safe, secure places to live, parents earn more, kids learn better, health and well-being improve, communities prosper, and we all thrive. We all thrive when families have a decent place to lay their heads at night. We all thrive when we can live near our place of work, reducing the time and expense of commuting. We all thrive when children have a secure home. Some of you have heard me quote this research before, but it indicates that kids are more likely to succeed in school and have better job prospects in the future. They don't suffer the stress of wondering where they will sleep. We all thrive when Minnesotans have strong pathways to building wealth through home ownership. Homeowners can build and pass on wealth, which can help break a cycle of poverty and generate resources to invest in the community. And finally, we all thrive when our seniors are integrated into our local communities and can choose a place to live that meets their physical, cognitive, and social needs. However, despite the importance of housing, many of our brothers and sisters struggle to find a safe and stable and affordable place to live. And this burden falls, not unexpectedly, on the people most vulnerable. I think we are called to ask why in this country do so many of our fellow citizens not or struggle to have a place to call home. Tonight, we're going to hear a little bit about some of the whys and more importantly, how one organization is helping to address the need for affordable housing. We have with us as our guest tonight, Alan Arthur. Alan is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Aon Homes. Aon is a Twin Cities-based developer and manager of affordable homes. Also, to help put this in perspective, we're going to hear from CJ Simmons Fay Jones. CJ is a member of Aon's board of directors and a resident of one of Aon's properties. Before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to Father Michael to start us off with an opening prayer. Father Michael? No, Liz has to unmute you.
Well, good evening, everyone. So let's begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, God, we enter this evening time together with praise for you, our source, our sustainer, the one who calls out to us constantly, come home to me, come home. We hear your voice. We give you thanks that you desire to be our home forever, that our home truly and finally is in you, the very place where we began. We marvel at who you are, the great one, the holy one, the marvelous one, yet at the same time, according to your holy word, the one who desires your home to be within us, mere mortals. We know that our great desire and need for home while here on earth is in itself a sign of the nature and destiny you have placed within us. This evening, we thank you for the earthly places, structures, and people who have been home to us along our journey. By them, we have been sheltered, welcomed, and healed. Yet we are aware of the multitudes of people who have insufficient places to lay their head at night and to prepare themselves for the new day each morning. And so we come together here to learn of their struggles and the power of home to transform their journeys here on earth. We ask you to open our ears and especially to open our hearts. Let us grow more wise and more loving together. We pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Father.
Welcome.
I appreciate the reference to home. So let's get started with the substance of our program this evening. In just a second, I'm going to turn things over to Alan. Before I do, I want to share a little background. I first met Alan more than a decade ago. At that time, Ann Holmes had approached the city of Roseville to redevelop what were then called the Harmar Apartments, which many of you have probably seen. They're just west of Snelling, south of Highway 36. At that time, the apartments were well past their prime. They were the scene of a lot of police calls. They were not a good place to live. Ann came in, rehabbed those buildings, renamed them Sienna Green, and turned them into beautiful housing. And that was just the first phase. They later constructed an additional housing on the site. And that really opened my eyes to the experience of what could be done to provide safe and affordable housing for people. So Alan's going to talk about the need for affordable housing, sort of the situation right now, particularly for people who are working and maybe barely making minimum wage and the difficulty to find housing. Alan's also going to talk about the mechanics of how affordable housing gets done. Some of you may have seen the article in yesterday's Star Tribune about a project that Aon is working on with St. Olave's Church in downtown Minneapolis to bring 500 units of affordable housing to that site. In the article, Alan is described as, quote, bemused by the complicated tax-driven sideways approach to paying for affordable housing. And he's going to educate us a little bit on that complicated sideways approach. And Alan's going to introduce CJ in a little bit, and she'll share her experience with Aon Housing and what that has meant to her. So with that, oh, and also if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. You can scroll down over the bottom. There's this chat tool there. You can send it out to the group. We'll be monitoring that. And then if there's some topics that don't get covered during the talk, we're going to devote about 20 minutes at the end to answering questions. So please feel free to send your questions out there. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alan. Alan?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Craig. I appreciate being here today. It's it's great to be here. It's a beautiful spring day in Minnesota, right? Well, maybe a little warmer than spring. Again, I'm Alan Arthur, and I'm the CEO and president of Aon. Aon is a nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1986, and we have a very simple reason for being, and that is that every person has a home. Pretty simple in concept, a little harder in practice, a little harder in implementation. One of the greatest things about working here at Aon is I get to work every day with people who care about others, people who care about their community. And that's tough to be. Not everybody gets to go to work every day and have that be the case. As well, we get to make an impact on the lives of families and individuals in our community. One of the great people I get to work with is one of our board members and a resident of Aon, and I'd like to introduce her. And then after she talks, as Craig said, I will talk a little bit more about some of the technical aspects of both Aon and our work. And with that, I'm very proud to introduce you to CJ. CJ, you're on.
Hi, everyone. My name is CJ, and I am an Aon resident and a member of the board of directors. I'm here to talk to you, to speak to you about the power of home and tell you the difference that stable housing has made in my life. Growing up, I spent summers in Minneapolis where my dad lived, and I loved it. Unlike New York, I'm a New Yorker / Minnesotan. The streets in Minneapolis were clean. The people were friendly, and I love seeing ducks in the parks and trees blooming in the neighborhood. I love Minneapolis so much that I made it my home when I was 20. Since then, my life has had its ups and downs. For years, finding home was a struggle for me and my two sons. Over the course of several years, me and my two sons lost our homes twice. The buildings we lived in were sold, and we had little time to find a new home. At times, during that time, I even overcame the addiction to crack cocaine. Later, it was an abusive marriage for which my husband relapsed back into drug addiction and my marriage ended. I continued to keep my addiction, or my recovery in together, as you would say. And the building that I was living in was managed by a slumlord. And that forced me to find a new home. And all the while I went back to start a new career of becoming a counselor, chemical dependency counselor, that is, to help others like myself overcome their addiction. I was working numerous jobs. I was struggling to make ends meet. I didn't have time to dwell on my situation. I knew I had to be strong and keep going. I've grown a lot since then, and I've changed. I've made so many changes in my life for the better. And I've been blessed because today I live in a beautiful Aon apartment. And the property is the Maryland. Beautiful place. Oops, I'm sorry. And when I was shown my apartment on the day that the site manager called me, I fell to my knees. It is so hard to be pushed out of your home. And I just collapsed and started crying. And she said, "What's wrong, CJ?" And I said, "I have a home and somewhere where no one will take it from me." And I was so grateful. And I thanked her. I am so blessed that Aon provided me a place of home and support which gave me stability to reach my potential. This stability has empowered me to become the woman I am today. Because of the security of having a home, I'm able to speak to you now. My sons are grown, they're doing wonderful. I am so blessed and thankful to Aon. And I want to thank the Catholic Church of Corpus Christi for allowing me to tell my story at this parish hall forum. I hope you all have a good evening, and I so appreciate y'all taking the time to listen to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, CJ. You know, CJ talked about that we provided home, but actually we don't. We provide the opportunity of home. And it's tremendous folks like CJ who make it home. So it's a really a partnership between us and our residents. And CJ has been such a great leader and role model for residents at the Maryland, because that's what's required to actually take that last step to make home possible. You know, home is pretty high on the need scale for human beings. There's air, water, food, home. And home isn't just a building. Home is the people. Home is love. If you think about the deeper meaning of home, much, much deeper than just housing. We talk from a technical standpoint about affordable housing, but remember that Aon's vision is that every person has a home. We even have ways of measuring that I can talk about later if you're interested in that, and the elements that we believe make home a home. So CJ, thank you, not just for tonight, for being here tonight with me, but thank you for all the leadership that you provide, not only on our board of directors, but the passion and spirit that you bring to it every day, but to what you do at the Maryland itself to make it home, not just for yourself, for others. So thank you so much.
Thank
So again, we've been around since 1986 when a group of church folks and housing advocates in downtown Minneapolis got together to protest the fact that 4,500 affordable apartments had been torn down in downtown Minneapolis between the mid-60s and the mid-80s. Those four churches were Central Lutheran, Westminster, Wesley, which no longer exists, but the leader there, Dennis Alexander, was a tremendous leader in the early days of Aon and in the affordable housing arena back then, and then Hennepin Avenue Methodist. Those four churches and a lot of housing activists got together and formed Aon, which actually was formed as Central Community Housing Trust of Minneapolis. It's a long name, and we rebranded about 15 years ago so people could remember our name. Yeah, so I could remember our name. It was a long name. We've been plugging away ever since. I'm going to share a screen now. First of all, maybe somebody has a question for CJ. There might be. Is there a question for CJ? And you can ask later too, but I just want to make sure that if you got one now, no?
So while you're pulling that up, CJ, before the call, you mentioned some of the activities and volunteer things you do within your building. Can you tell us about some of the programs that the residents put on and ways that you make community in your building?
Oh my gosh, we have, well, there's the Super Bowl. We have a Super Bowl party every Super Bowl. Yes. And everybody has their own team. We have our spring fling, which is when it's spring, we get together and we, with our RC coordinators, we put together and do a spring fling, decorate our community room. And we have a resident here that is an amazing cook. And we all volunteer. There's 12 of us and we volunteer, and she cooks everything and we chop. We're the choppers. She's the director. And she makes amazing meals. Then we have our 4th of July. And we also do Christmas. And we have a dinner. And everything is organized between the community where I live with our residents and our RC coordinator. So it's so much fun in that. And then our coordinator also provides us with events that we can go to, like the Twins. We go to watch the Timberwolves. We get tickets for that. And even got some tickets to see the Vikings. So the zoo, we do a lot of stuff in our community. And the pandemic did a lot of taking away from a lot of stuff, but we still, as a community, still go outside. We did our social distancing and we kept in contact with each other in that. So I love my community.
Thank you.
So one of the interesting things about our properties is sometimes even our own staff say, shouldn't we form a community council or a community group there, a resident council? And our basic approach is we'll help with some of the technical details if you'd like, but it's a resident council. It's not our council. And there is a resident council at the Maryland, and I know that they're pretty active, sometimes beating up on us on occasion for various things. But the communities themselves decide not to form their own resident councils, or maybe more than one in some cases. When CJ referred RC, she's talking about our resident connections staff that we have that right now serve about 25 of our 58 properties. We're trying to plan for 2022 to come close to doubling the number of resident connection staff so that we can actually serve more of our properties than we're serving today. Thanks, CJ. Any other questions for CJ?
No more have come in yet. So keep
Okay.
writing them in the chat, guys.
Okay, here we go. I'm gonna see if we can get this screen shared. Do you see this screen? Does it show yet?
Yes, it does.
People say yes, okay. Whoops, gotta go to it, don't I? So 35 years, we have 58 properties. We've had more than 40 local and national awards. We now have 5,660 affordable apartment homes, which include more than 500 apartment homes for homeless persons, or homeless when they come to us, of course, serving 15,000 families and individuals. That's a significant responsibility that I and our fellow staff people and our board of directors, board members like CJ, are responsible for every year, providing home for 15,000 people. We have properties like this one, which was our first property in 1986, just to give you a picture of what does affordable housing look like. If we don't know it, if we haven't seen it, there's a specter that maybe arises in our minds. It's just nice apartment buildings of various kinds. This is a building that's on the National Register of Historic Places. We've actually, in our 30-some years, put 8 buildings on the National Register of Historic Places. We've saved several from the wrecking ball, including this one. This is the first large mixed income housing property in the Twin Cities. We did it. This is it in real life. St. Barnabas for homeless youth. We're one of the first 2 organizations in the country to serve homeless youth with this kind of program. The Crane Ordway in St. Paul is also on the National Register of Historic Places. The Lamoureux, which you might recognize if you ever go to Twins games or go to Target Center. This is the O'Donovan's Pub down below. There are 67 homeless and near homeless folks who live right above the O'Donovan's Pub. The Continental at the corner of 12th and LaSalle says Continental Hotel. It was a hotel at one time, a residential hotel, the last remaining residential hotel of its kind in downtown Minneapolis. Once there were dozens. This is at the corner of Franklin and Portland. This is Ripley Gardens, also in the National Register of Historic Places. Is the only hospital at the turn of the century that allowed Jewish doctors to practice, and the only hospital in the state of Minnesota that would serve unwed mothers. It was a maternity hospital. That's how it looked when we took it over, and that's how it looks now. This property serves 60 homeless adults with chemical dependency histories. The building on the right, we actually moved 80 feet to make room for the building on the left. That's what it looks in real life. That was the rendering before. Rendering, real thing. This is the property that Craig talked about, Sienna Green in Roseville. This is the new building we built on the property for families. This is the greenest, most sustainable, energy efficient, materials healthy project in the United States, affordable housing project in the United States of America. Well, I can't prove that, but it is extremely sustainable building and won several awards. That's what it looks like at night. And here's CJ's home, the Maryland, on LaSalle, south of 12th Street. This is a property we purchased. We purchased it right before a market buyer bought it and was going to turn it into market housing. We're losing 6,000 affordable apartments a year in the Twin Cities, and we only produce a couple thousand at most. This is one that we rescued right before it was to be sold to somebody else. 422 apartments, and that 422 households would have essentially been economically evicted. What's happening is market buyers are buying them, fixing them up a little bit, and raising rents $300, $400, $500 or more, basically economically evicting the people who live there. 40% of the folks who live there in these properties, when we buy them, have incomes where they're paying 50 or 60% of their meager income for their housing. So they're right on the edge of homelessness. In one of the cases in Richfield, similar to this one, 40 40 kids became homeless because of one transaction. The school district laid off 31 employees because so many kids had to leave the school district because of one transaction. This is a property in Mound that we renovated, purchased from Public Housing Authority and renovated. This is one of the NOAA. You'll hear me talk a little bit more about NOAA's naturally occurring affordable housing that we also rescued from the marketplace before it got sold into the marketplace. This is the Lewis, a brand new construction project over off of University Avenue in the Prospect Park area. This is a property that is being built right now down in Bloomington. It's called Blooming Meadows North. We purchased a 306 apartment NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing, to save it as affordable. And it was a 13-acre site, so we had some extra room, and we decided to build 172 additional apartments there. It's under construction. It'll open up this year. This is a property that's also under construction in Edina. 70 apartments. It'll be 70 apartments. The foundation is just out of the ground on this one. It'll open up in late this year, or probably early first quarter of next year. What's the need? Even before the next 10 years happen, we have the need for over 50,000 affordable apartments. And again, as I said, we're losing upwards of 6,000. Last few years, we have lost 6,000 per year, even though Aon in the last 4 years has rescued 3,000. Still, 6,000 a year has been lost the last few years. And in the last 10 years, somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 a year. When I say lost, I mean people are buying, investors are buying them. They see the market demand for housing. They're buying them, sprucing them up, and again, raising the rents, which economically evicts most, if not all, of the residents. The state of Minnesota, all of us, including us and others, are only producing 1,500 to 2,500 units annually. So you can see we're getting behind her and behind her. It's going to be hard to fix that 50,000 household problem if every year it mounts to be a bigger problem. It's our prediction at Aon that homelessness is going to at least double. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that's the case. The bottom line is, even if we're half wrong, it's going to significantly increase. As I point out to folks, I usually am half wrong. But there's a lot of pointers of both social policy, economic reality. If we keep paying people, $15 or less an hour, I have to laugh when suddenly soon we might raise minimum wage to $15 an hour. Well, we've been talking about that for 8 years. Now the minimum should be $20 an hour. So, it's not exactly happening in time. I'd like to talk a little bit. Craig had said that people want to know some of the technical details. I'm going to give you a very simplistic view of how our housing gets done. And this is, again, a very rough sketch of a very complicated financial path that we take, as well as a complicated political path that we take to produce affordable housing or to preserve and save affordable housing. On the left, this is rough examples. On the left-hand column is new construction. And actually, new construction is probably pushing more to $350,000 now. The prices of materials have skyrocketed in the last few months and continue to climb. I just myself paid $45 for a piece of plywood the other day that a year ago I could have bought for $14. So that piece of plywood has tripled in 1 year. But using this model here, new construction, let's say rounded off, costs $300,000. In that financial situation, we might get a first mortgage loan of about $105,000. A low-income housing tax credit equity, so money that doesn't require repayment, of $150,000, about half, give or take, depending on every property is different, every project's different, about half of the total. I'll come back to that low-income housing tax credit equity. And then we have to get three sources, funny sources, non-debt coverage sources, sources that don't have to make mortgage payments or make annual payments of about $45,000 or $50,000. That adds up to the $300,000. To go through that process takes us 3 to 5 years. Now let's come back to it. If the property has a mortgage loan on it of any kind, that means the overall costs monthly are higher. The model I've put in front of you here basically serves folks with incomes right around 60% of area median income. For a family of four, that would mean an income of $60,000 or somewhere around $60,000, because the median income in the Twin Cities, meaning half the households make more and half the households make less, the median, or 100% of the median, is over $100,000. So 60% of area median would be about $60,000. For a single individual, the number would be about $45,000, $47,000. There's a different median for different family sizes. So that model you see in front of you, where there's a first mortgage loan, would serve households at 60% of area median income. If we wanted to serve households at 30% of area median income, so families of four who are making $30,000 or less, which is somewhere around that 15,000, a little less than 15,000, $15 per hour, which a lot of people make, we would have to basically eliminate that first mortgage loan. And if we eliminate that first mortgage loan, that means we'd have to come up with free money, not non-debt service money, money that doesn't require monthly payments, out of that government other source. And that makes it really, really hard to do. Now, what is the low-income housing equity? What is the low-income housing tax credit? It's a federal program that gives basically rich corporations tax breaks for investing in affordable housing. And here's how it works basically. The federal government provides a certain amount of tax breaks across the country. The state of Minnesota gets a certain part. The Minnesota Housing Finance Agency gets the right to give them out on a piece of paper. They have a competitive process that we apply for. Every year there might be 45 or 50 applications and only 13 successful applications. If we're one of the successful applications, and there are a bunch of criteria, this piece of paper is passed to us from the state, and this piece of paper says you get to reduce your taxes by X amount based on the size of the project and some other criteria. We wave this out in the air, we let people know it's here, and corporations bid on that piece of paper, and they provide that $150,000 out of that 300 that I talked about. What are they buying? Do we have to pay them back? We do not. That's the great thing about the tax credit. We do not have to pay them back, but we do have to run the property affordable for at least 15 years. In the state of Minnesota, it's 45 years. The federal government says 15. The state of Minnesota has added an additional 30 years to that number. We have to promise to keep it affordable for that 45 years. And in return, they get this piece of paper, which just says they get tax breaks for 10 years, each year for 10 years. And so that's what they paid for. They paid for this piece of paper. And they do a value calculation about how much this paper is worth to them. And that's the bidding that comes into us. And we don't always take the highest bidder. We take the highest, like any other bidding process, we take the highest responsible bidder, because these folks are going to be our partners for at least 15 years. And so we want a partner we can trust and work with, et cetera. But we'll take the highest bid that we can trust, obviously, because it produces more of that money and helps build the new housing. I'm going to share the screen again. Questions about the low-income housing tax credit before I describe the NOAA financing? No? Okay. NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing, and what it's called. I think that's a silly name, but that's what it's called in our arena. I call it naturally deteriorating affordable housing. In other words, it's older stuff that's sliding downhill, and somebody better grab it and fix it up, or it's going to be a really bad place to live. Sometimes when we get them, they are kind of bad places to live. Most of them haven't been horrible, but they had a lot of deferred maintenance. So naturally occurring affordable housing. Notice that the cost is half, sometimes less than half the cost of new construction. This $150,000 cost is really recent costs, overall costs, which include the cost of acquisition as well as the cost of rehabbing it, putting some renovation money into the property. It wasn't that long ago we could buy these properties for $80,000, $85,000, but the demand, there are so many investors across the country bidding on these that there's a huge demand and the costs have gone up, as it has for housing in general in the Twin Cities. As a matter of fact, we bid on a property not too long ago in Wayzata, 107 units. We were one of 40 bidders. We finished second. That means that 107 households were economically evicted. If we had bid 10,000 more per unit, we would have got that property and preserved it as an affordable housing. Actually, we would have probably economically evicted some of the residents as well, because we couldn't have made it the financing work to save all 107. We were going to try to save as many as 107 as we could. So in the NOAA lineup here that you see, the cost is half the cost of new construction, because they're used properties, of course. The first mortgage loan ends up being about the same, more or less, if we're going to serve folks at or around 60% of area median income. The equity, the non-debt service money, the non-mortgage loan money, is social equity. I'll come back to that in a second. And then only $25,000 approximately in today's world is needed from the government or other sources. What are those sources? In both these cases, it's city government, county government, sometimes the Metropolitan Council government agency, the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, occasionally the federal government, although one of the great problems we have is the federal government has really backed away from affordable housing significantly since 1985. And sometimes if we're really, really serving homeless people or near homeless people, foundations will get involved and also provide capital for our projects. But the overall cost, as you see, is half the cost of new construction. And the time period to get to saving it is 60 to 90 to say 120 days. Whereas doing the new route, mostly because we have to apply for these tax credits, which is a laborious process, as well as raise the other $45,000 that's there, takes typically 3 to 5 years. Now, if you were the czar of the world and you were making a decision whether you'd put you had a huge problem with affordable housing, whether you'd put your money into the new construction arena or pair some off to the side to put in the NOAA arena, which would you do? I think if we asked second graders this, they'd say, well, the one on the right's half the cost. We could produce twice as many units, or at least save and or produce twice as many units for the same amount of money. But that's not what the government has done. The government still stays focused on the new construction and is putting very little money to the NOAA preservation, very little. The state of Minnesota does still not today, after complaining about it for more than 8 years, still today does not have a specified NOAA fund or NOAA program to save NOAA housing, even though we're losing 6,000 a year and have been for quite some time. Social equity. What is social equity? It is, we compete with the private marketplace. Why we can buy some of these instead of having them be sold to market buyers is we compete in 2 ways. Number one, the equity folks who invest with us as our partners do not require the same amount of return. They require return, but not the same amount of return that the marketplace might require a 12 to 25 to even 30% return on their investment. Our investors require somewhere between typically a 2 to 8%. Most typical is 5.5 to 8% on their money. That allows us to compete in the marketplace. The other thing that allows us to compete is the state of Minnesota. If we promise to keep the housing affordable below 60% of area median income, they give us a significant real estate tax break. And we've been at the legislature this year to try to get an additional tax break because the skyrocketing valuations are basically doing away with our the help of the tax break we get in real estate taxes. Let's see. I think that's it. I'll unshare. That's pretty rudimentary, but I'm happy to get in more detail, but I wasn't sure, Craig, how much detail folks wanted me to do, but I can answer any detailed questions you have, I think. So with that, questions.
Yeah, so we got quite a few coming in the chat. So one for Alan. Curious about the Aon's typical number of units in a property.
Hmm.
Will the St. Olaf property be the largest? And what do
No.
you see as the risks in that?
Yeah, no, it won't be the largest. We just purchased at the end of 2000, let's see, am I dreaming here? Make sure I get it right. At the beginning of 2020, we purchased the second largest real multifamily property in the state of Minnesota, Huntington Place in Brooklyn Park, 834 apartments. It's like a small little town, really. And it's very dysfunctionally designed as well. And so we not only have to improve the physical conditions, we've got a lot of work to do over the course of time to fix the design problems of the campus. It's a 35-acre campus. If somebody didn't show you how to even get to the two buildings, it's a 6-building property, to the two buildings in the back side of this property, you couldn't get there. You couldn't figure out how to get to them. It's a really badly designed property. But we're working on it. We've already put several $1 million into it. We have to raise that money, of course, from various sources, and we still got a lot of money to raise to improve that property. Is there a risk in doing a 500-unit building? Sure. Yeah, we take risks every day. I don't think there's a risk that if we can get it built, that'll get leased. I'm pretty sure it'll get leased up. That's not a problem. The demand for the affordable places to live is just tremendous, and I think it's going to continue to be strong until we do something about how the economy works. Just to give you just a real quick snapshot of that economy, 17% of the workers in this state make minimum wage. 37% of the workers in the state make less than $15 an hour. Almost 50% of the jobs we create at compensation levels that would qualify them for affordable housing. So as long as we insist on not providing enough money for people to live on, then we're going to have this problem. And it's an economic problem fundamentally. That's the sideways approach Craig mentioned earlier, that we're trying to, on the backside, fix the problem when ideally it would be fixed a little bit better on the front side. And see, there was a couple other questions in there in that same biggest risk. Well, there was another question. Was there another question, Amanda?
When Aon purchases NOAA, is it still categorized as NOAA, or does the fact that it becomes income restricted put it in a different category?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that question before, and I don't know really the answer to it. I suppose it's suddenly affordable housing, isn't it? If it has some income restrictions on it, it's no longer NOAA, I suppose. Once we purchase it and there's income restrictions placed on it, I guess that would be true. NOAA is not really a very technical term anyway, but
Okay.
yeah.
So kind of in the same realm then, does Aon's property work through Hennepin and Ramsey coordinated entry systems, or are they more of an open market?
That is a very good question. All of our housing that is directly and programmatically intended to serve homeless people does go through the coordinated entry process, which quite frankly is challenging. It adds another layer of bureaucracy, and bureaucracies being what they are. And I always say bureaucracies start when the second person enters a room. That's when they start. But it does add a layer of complication to the process for both the resident and us, frankly.
Many luxury apartments are being built with the promise that they will reserve a portion of the development for affordable units. But I've heard that in the fine print, they only commit to keep them affordable for 10 years. Why can they get away with that? Is the question.
That is a very good question. They have a stronger lobby than politicians have brains. It is unacceptable that we allow any private entity to take public money for affordable housing without guaranteeing that it stay affordable forever. I am opposed to building affordable housing in these market properties, not because we don't need the housing, but because I know they will disappear as affordable at some point, and we will just as desperately need the housing then as we do today. And so to allow market some of these folks are my friends. I say this to them directly all the time in the marketplace. It is unconscionable that they are able to turn affordable housing into market after the 10 or 15 or sometimes a 20-year term. The federal government was just as stupid with the largest affordable housing program ever in the history of the United States. It's called the Section 236 program. They basically gave developers and owners money to build, made them run it as affordable, and of course paid them to manage it for 20 years, and then let them walk away with 20 years of increased equity in those properties. Totally unconscionable. Shouldn't have been allowed to happen, but it's still happening in different ways today.
You mentioned that in some cases when you purchase NOAA, some people are have forced eviction. Do you guys have a plan to assist those people to other housing?
Yeah, I don't know if we have ever forced anybody out because our job, it's when market buyers buy them, they force people out. Well, I take it back. I'm sure we've forced a few people out who aren't behaving, who aren't being good neighbors. I don't know that we've forced anybody out, or certainly not many economically. We have in most cases raised the rents $50 or $75 a month, and that's typically what we've had to do to get them financed and to actually save them. I'll give you an anecdotal story. When we bought Seasons Park, they don't know who Aon is. The residents, the 422 households, they have the slightest idea. We were I think the third property management company in 5 years, so they don't know who we are. So we rented a bus and we took them on a bus to some of our properties. Well, as we're going to the first property, got a bus load of folks, 45 people on the bus. And the first question was, I took questions. The first question was, of course, are you going to raise the rents? And I said, well, yes, I'm sorry, but we are going to have to finance this acquisition. We have to raise rents somewhere around $50 a month. The bus erupted in cheers. First time I've ever had a resident start cheering that we were going to raise rents $50 a month. Why did they cheer? Because the previous landlord was already raising rents $150 a month in preparation for selling the property. And they knew that right down the street, a few blocks away, another owner was raising rents $300 a month when he purchased the property. And so that's why they cheered. So yeah, it's possible. And of course we would help anybody if they were in that situation. But I'm not sure I don't know of any stories that we economically evicted anybody.
You mentioned the bad neighbors. Many people fear crime when they hear that poor people are going to be living near me. What is the truth about crime rates in your developments?
Well, I think in our developments that we don't have significant crime. Right now, we're suffering in several locations in where our buildings are located. The neighborhoods are suffering significant crime. Well, I guess they are in our buildings because there's people getting in our buildings and causing problems of various kinds. They're breaking into cars, et cetera. So it's our residents who are suffering, our good residents. And by the way, all of our residents aren't always good. I always say that every apartment property out there, whether it's high buck property or affordable, run into residents who aren't doing what they're supposed to do. The difference between a good owner and a bad owner is whether you do something about it and how fast. And so we insist that our residents are responsible, pay their rent, treat their home with respect, and treat people with respect. And if you can't do that, then you can't live in our properties.
So kind of going off that, once Aon Housing is built, who manages the property and how hands-on are you with your management?
Yeah, we have 220 staff people, and 80% of those staff people are with the property operations staff. So site managers, assistant site managers, maintenance people, building technicians, cleaning people, et cetera. That's 80%, a little over 80% of our 220 staff. So we have our own property management team, and it's a tremendously, very, very good team. As a matter of fact, people keep asking me what was 2020 like with COVID. I said it was extremely inspiring for me because I watched our staff pull together, fight hard. Some of our peers' staffs, I heard through the grapevine, didn't want to go to work. Our staff was the opposite. They strained at the bit to go to work because they knew that the properties and the people who live there needed them. And so we have some tremendous staff who all care about other people.
Right now, I know the city of St. Paul is looking at putting a rent control bill up for debate and potentially on the ballot this fall. What is your opinion on something like that? Do those benefit affordable housing, or is there enough clauses in them that it's more of a pretty picture to help paint the political?
Yeah, rent control is a complicated issue. I get asked this question all the time.
Okay.
And I can't really give an easy answer. I'd have to see all of the details about it.
Okay.
If it was controlling how fast you could raise rents, I think that could be a very positive and for many, many families and households in our community. If it was too draconian, I think it can cause as many problems as it helps. So it just depends on how it's worded and what it intends to do.
All right. Question about your name, Aon. How did you come up with it, and what does it mean, or what is the significance?
Yeah, and you heard Craig say Aon Homes. It's actually not Aon Homes, but when we changed our name, that's all right, Craig. When we changed our name for about 3 months, we could not get ownership of the word Aon and trademark it. And so for 3 months only, we called ourselves Aon Homes technically. And unfortunately, that's stuck in some people's heads. It is actually Aon, yeah, including Craig's head. And Aon is the Latin spelling of the word eon, or forever. So that's where it came from. Oh, so it's not an acronym and should not be capitalized.
And I just wanted to add, when you asked about the crime and that in our properties. In our properties, well, where I live at, our residents are very close, and we keep an eye on our building. We're not trying to be cops or whatever, but we try to keep it safe for all of us. Most of us were raised in the old way, where it takes a village to keep your home safe. And everybody, if someone leaves to go on a trip or whatever, oh, they're gone, keep an eye, make sure everything's fine. If someone is lurking outside that doesn't look like a good person to be looking out, walking around the building, it goes down, I would say, a telegraph through the building, and then we bring it to our site manager that someone has been lurking, and if it happens on the weekend, we kind of monitor, and we have security for our building, and we let the security personnel know that certain people have been around the building. But we pretty much keep our community safe, with the assistance of Aon, but we step up and make sure that we're okay. Because even though this isn't a house, this is a home.
Yeah, thank you, CJ, very much for stepping in and saying that. We do depend on our residents to take ownership. And that is part of the definition of home. A few years ago, we asked hundreds of people, what does home mean to you? And I'm pretty sure that if I ask you guys here today what it means to you, you would come up with these 3 elements. The first element is a feeling of safety and security. It's my oasis. It's my sanctuary. After a hard day, I come through the door and I feel like I can relax and breathe again. The second big element is one of community, connection with other people. People in those interviews would say, it's where I have my family, or where I'm proud to bring my family, my friends, or where I'm part of a community. One formerly homeless man, and just died of COVID, as a matter of fact, one of our residents, said to me, Alan, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm part of something bigger than just myself. Whoa, Eddie, I said, at age 41, first time in your life? So there's this social connection with others. And the third big element that makes up home is what we call ownership, but it's not legal ownership. It's this taking of ownership that CJ just talked about. It's being accountable to each other and to the community. Those three elements we discovered with these hundreds of interviews are what people believe how home is defined. And we use that to try to figure out whether we're being successful or more successful or less successful on different properties. We do an annual survey that tries to get at that so that we can find ways to improve the opportunity of home for our residents. Thank you, CJ.
Another question that just came in, are all the current Aon properties multi-generational, or do you have different types of housing?
Wide different types. For example, we did one of the first homeless youth housing projects in the nation. We have 2 homeless youth projects now for homeless, I say homeless teenagers, but it's not just teenagers, it's typically age 16 to 21. Then we have seniors only housing, which even today is not technically seniors only. It also allows folks with handicaps, also disabilities, thank you, disabilities to live there as well, but it's predominantly senior. We've got several predominantly senior properties. And then our other housing is, I would say, yes, multi-generational, wide range of folks and ages and diversity of many, many kinds in our housing.
Is there a minimum number of units to be viable for a new build?
Good question. We like 100 or more. The funding, that's the tax credit funding that's available almost pushes you to about 70 units. Unless it's a 4%, now I'll be getting really complicated, 4% tax credit property. So the 2 new constructions that I talked about earlier, the Blooming Meadows North, which is 172 units, that can only be 172 units because it's a 4% tax credit property. The 9% credit, which is more valuable, basically pushes you to be a 70 unit property. And guess what Edina is? A 9% tax credit property, and it has 70 units. So some of the restrictions and the way the programs work, the financing programs work, do push you to a certain number of housing. Supportive housing projects would serve folks with significant social needs and are going to also need rent subsidies as well as more intensive social services. They tend to be 40 to 50 units in size because you've got to raise so much more other kinds of money to help support the rent subsidies as well as the services. And so we like, from a property management standpoint, we'd like 100 units and more, but that doesn't always work.
Hey, can I jump in for a second? I see we're coming up on the top of the hour and there are still a few questions. I don't know, Alan and CJ, do you have maybe another 5 minutes or so?
I'm good.
Okay, Amanda, do you want to?
Sorry, I was reading a question.
All
We
right.
got 5 more minutes, is that what you just said?
Yep.
I'm reading.
Well, can I use my prerogative as moderator
Yes.
just to ask a question while you're looking,
Yes,
Alan?
you may.
I was very interested because, as you know, we've talked for Corpus Christi has some property, and as a parish, we've talked before about the possibility of whether we could do affordable housing on that site. And that's not the purpose of our meeting tonight, but I am curious. I noticed that St. Olaf is doing a 99-year lease as opposed to or at least that's the discussion, as opposed to the sale of the property. Can you talk a little bit about why a lease and are there some advantages for St. Olaf and some for Aon, or what are the dynamics with that?
Yeah, it doesn't really make any difference for Aon much. I mean, it's a little more complicated to do a lease, but fundamentally, there's way more difficult things in making these things happen than whether it's a lease or a purchase. And the lease really has this similar value. I mean, we can only pay so much. If we pay for the property, then we basically got to borrow to pay for the property, which is part of the overall financing of the project. And so a lease is just going to be the same amount of money monthly for operating as it would be to pay the mortgage that we use to borrow the money to buy the property. So we wouldn't do the deal unless it was there about the same to us financially to make the project happen. I think the church in that case decided that it just didn't want to let go of that asset, although it's 99 years, it's a long time. It just didn't feel right to let go of the asset. So we said, well, then lease it to us. And so that's what they're doing.
Are any of your properties mixed income with some affordable and some market rate?
Yeah, very good question too. Again, I showed you East Village, which is the first mixed income, mixed use, significant mixed income, mixed use project of its kind in the Twin Cities. We did it. So that means it, but first we have to ask, what does market rate mean? And what does affordable mean? So each of you probably lives in affordable housing. At least you can afford it, or you wouldn't live there, right?
Mhm.
And what does market mean? Well, market. In our world, we call it affordable if it has some kind of government restrictions on it, and we call it market if it does not have any government restrictions. So even though if you looked at some of our internal paperwork, it's not something that's out there much. We have about 350 apartments out of the 5,660 that we call market internally, but they are actually affordable housing. There's no government restrictions on them. We could theoretically raise rents to whatever level we could get in the marketplace, but we don't. They are affordable. Some of them aren't as affordable as 60% AMI. Some of them are 70% AMI, but that's still considered affordable housing by all government agencies that are out there. So it depends on what you mean by market. So we do have some mixed income properties, which certain units will serve folks below 30% of area median income. A certain number of units will serve, for example, folks between 50 and 60% of median income. And a certain number of units will not have any restrictions, but typically still serve folks between 60 and 70% of area median income. So do we have those kinds of properties? Yes, those mixed kind of properties. Yes, we do. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about getting neighborhood buy-in?
Yeah, I hear from even some of my peers locally and around the country that one of the hard things is not in my backyard. This tremendous opposition. I have to say that my life has been threatened several times in my tenure here at Aon for trying to put affordable housing in a particular neighborhood or a particular area. But I always just the next day call them up and say, hey, you got time for breakfast or coffee, even though I don't drink coffee. And we have never, some of our peers have, we have never not gotten a project because of not in my backyard, because our approaches are very straightforward, practical. Take a look at what we do and come and tour it if you'd like, and sit down and have breakfast or coffee with you. And in general, 99% of folks decide not to kill you, even though I have had my life threatened. I even had one person tell me in a meeting, we know you don't get home till after 5 o'clock, but your 8-year-old gets home at 3 o'clock from school. Now, depending on who said that, would have garnered a different reaction from me possibly, but I know who said it, and had coffee with them the next day or lunch or something. I can't remember exactly, but that's the approach we've always taken, a very practical approach, and we've never had NIMBY, not in my backyard, scuttle a project. We've had finances and other things scuttle a project, but we've never had not in my backyard reaction scuttle a project.
All right, we have one last question. I'm actually going to answer this one. I thought Corpus Christi was on the path to working with someone like Aon to build affordable housing on our property. What happened to that? So we are still looking at it, is the honest answer. We are moving towards this summer as things open back up, having more discussions like this one with our parish community, figuring out what our goals and objectives are, and then starting to have some conversations with a few different developers that we have been talking to get a feel for what our options are, if our property is a good fit, and having more of these discussions. So this is something that the BAC committee has been kind of working on for a long time, and something that the conversations are still ongoing. So look forward to more conversations this summer.
Great.
Late fall.
Thanks, Amanda, for fielding that question.
Yep.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, CJ, for sharing your information and your inspiring stories with us. Amanda has links to several organizations that are doing work in this area around affordable housing, including Aon, but some others as well. And I think we can send that out afterwards, correct, Amanda, to attendees. So we'll,
Yes.
Liz, I'm not sure who, we'll get that figured out. We'll provide you a link to those different sources. And can I just answer one question myself too? There was a question about increased crime in affordable housing, which I'm so involved in affordable housing, I kind of forgot that that's something people think of on occasion. But I know from personal experience, when I was mayor of Roseville, and when Aon acquired that property at Harmar Park, police calls went down. There was an improvement to the quality of life in that property as a result of the rehabilitation. So that is at least well-run affordable housing. That is simply not the case. So again, thank you everyone for your time this evening. It's been a really valuable discussion. And the BAT Committee and Social Justice will continue this work. And have a good night, everyone. Stay cool.